So is everybody here?
Oh, everyone here. Okay. Ash is coming. So everybody, all panelists are here.
That's good.
All right, so thank you for coming back for this session. This session is about wallet governance and key management. And we've got 6 distinguished panelists, discussants. So I'd like each of you to give 5 minutes or 3 minutes. Self-introduction, starting from Shady.
Hi guys, my name is Shady. I'm a co-founder of Holonym. It's a zero-knowledge identity protocol, also working on some exciting stuff. I heard you right? You said an introduction. Okay, cool. Yes. Yeah, really briefly, PhD in neuroscience and really working on currently securing digital identity with advanced cryptographic systems, drawing from zero-knowledge proof systems. And the biggest things that we spend a lot of time thinking about on our team is how do we utilize new ways like multi-party compute, ZK systems to reduce data custody risk for both enterprises and users. So it's kind of a catch-22 question, right? If you're not custodying your data, someone else is. And if someone else is, what sort of rules, regulations, or risks are they exposed to? So that's the brief intro. Thanks for having me. Wish I was there in sunny Croatia.
Yeah, this is funny and so useful. It's kind of pity that we are staying inside for this. Oh, that's life. Okay, so thanks very much, Shady. Next, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Chris. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Moderator. Moderator is developed a self-sovereign data network that aims to provide secure unrestricted storage for personal data, and we've connected that into decentralized identifiers with the DID core standard. And our objective really is to provide secure infrastructure that allows individuals to have complete control and agency over their personal data. And that data could be a credential, it could be their whole life's history of health data, the full gamut, I guess, of individual data is what we're aiming for. And we see a huge opportunity to give people their data and unlock that data to benefit the individual in a similar way to how, I guess, DeFi has unlocked innovation of new financial services and products. We think we can do something similar with personal data. So yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Can you do this self-introduction? We don't hear you. Maybe audio problems. Yeah. So Ash, we don't hear you. So we skip you briefly, and when we still have an audio, I'll get back to you. So Tommaso?
Sorry, you're talking to me?
Yeah. I was talking to you.
I just heard Chris. I did not hear a request for intro to myself, but regardless, I'm Ash, the founder of Jubi. Essentially, we're a self-service platform that allow people to manage their company's equity via tokens, and so keys and wallets are within our purview because people have to sign contracts for funding purposes that have implications on what people are allowed to do, and the impacts of such contract signing have legal implications.
Thanks a lot. Tommaso?
Hello, everyone. My name is Tommaso. I'm a mathematician, PhD in cryptography, and I am currently a senior cryptographer at Kudelski Security. Part of our duties is toward clients is to perform cryptographic code audits. So in the last few years, we have been involved in auditing many multi-party computation cryptographic libraries, especially in the context of threshold signature schemes and zero knowledge proof systems. That's it from my side. I also wish I were there.
Yeah, we miss you. Maybe Patrick?
Oh, yeah. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say, Ash, I'm proud by your beard. Very nice beard. Good line. Yeah, so I work at the Arbitrum Foundation doing research and education. And I guess I've been in the cryptocurrency industry for quite a while. I did my PhD back in 2013 as a researcher, and then I joined industry. And I think maybe the most relevant thing here, from my experience, is one, I've had to obviously be part of multi-sigs, and multi-sigs are very difficult to use right now. And I also, my startup was building a relay service. So helping people to reliably send transactions to Ethereum. So it's sort of like a content extraction using Gnosis safe under the hood. So I'm quite familiar with how these multi-sig wallets work as well.
Thanks, and this
I'm sorry.
please, it's different, or it can be different, so.
I'm sorry. Who's next? I'm sorry. It's really unclear with the echo.
So it's you.
Okay. So my name is Christopher Allen. I'm executive director and principal architect of Blockchain Commons. Our mission is to advocate for the creation of open, interoperable, secure, and compassionate digital infrastructure to enable people to control their own destiny and to maintain human dignity online. I'm known as the author of the 10 Principles of Self-Sovereign Identity, the co-author of the TLS 1.0 protocol through IETF, and I'm co-author of the decentralized identifier specification through the W3C. So I'm very active in moving these forward. In the last couple of years, I've really been moving down the stack. So I'm not actually implementing verifiable credential claims and things of that nature directly. Been trying to standardize, and understand the problems deeper down the stack as far as recovery, resilience, single points of failure, separation of concerns, separation of interest. How do we architect these things for to protect the vulnerable? So we've had some great results in this, ranging from a number of companies that are in kind of an alliance of Gordian developers who are working on collaborative seed recovery as the first step toward a more advanced quorum-based collaborative seed management. Collaborative key management. If you were at the previous session, I just feel like there's a lot of opportunities in the various forms of multi-sig and quorum space and zero knowledge space for addressing some of the weaknesses in our wallets today without sacrificing the principles of self-sovereign identity. I've also been very active on the advocacy side. I helped pass a law in Wyoming specifically to protect private keys that I'm trying to get into more countries and states. We also have a definition for digital identity that it goes outside of just property law. One of the problems is data is considered property. Property is under contract law, but also means it can be taken away from you, et cetera. So by reframing it under agency law, which can't be taken away from you, is a potential new way to protect our rights. But also things like the first DAO law, I was involved in that, and several other fairly significant initiatives in different countries. That's it.
Thank you very much. So Yeah, okay, so as for the microphone is great, very difficult to hear. Okay, maybe I just don't use it. So that, folks, can you hear
That's
me?
much better.
Okay, so let's do it like this. All right. So the first question, well, this panel is about wallet governance and key management. So first question from me to all the panelists is going to hinge on the wallet trust. So wallet runs typically runs on people's phone, but it being running on your phone doesn't warrant that the user actually has control on it. And also, it's actually not clear whether we can trust it or not. So let me hear your opinions on how we establish the trust on wallets or trust for wallets.
Maybe I can jump in quickly.
Please.
Can you guys hear me okay? Does that work? Okay, I got a thumbs up. Great. Anyway, then.
We can hear you remotely.
Awesome. So I think there's lots of different factors to consider when it comes to wallets on your phone. Ranging from what data does your wallet send back to the wallet provider, right down to the random number generator used to generate the seed. So one good example was in 2013, 2014, the random number generator in Android was broken, and this led to loss of funds on Bitcoin for several different wallets that were built on top of Android. And the problem there was that if you signed a transaction several times, the signature would leak. Because it was a bad random number generator, you could pick this up in the signatures. You had like 5 different signatures. You could then derive the private key and steal all of their funds. So the way at least the Bitcoin community got around that back then was adding in deterministic signatures. So they adopted a new standard for each DSA to help. So as long as you get one, as long as your seed is secure with a random number generator, then your signatures going forward should be okay because they're deterministic. So that was nice. That was a nice standard that they incorporated to help make wallets a bit more trustworthy, prevent private key leaking. But yeah, there's a whole host of issues that I'm sure the others can talk about.
Okay, next. Wants to speak on that?
I'd like to follow that up. This issue of, how do we trust our wallets is, an important one. I'm personally rather disturbed that in some communities, storing keys in a browser database is standard. I don't even like it in user space, much less in browser space. To this end, I have put together a community of silicon designers, wallet builders of hardware, and cryptographers to discuss the requirements for how can we do this more securely. This is the classic Ken Thompson problem from 1983, 1984 of how do you, what is the nature of trusting trust when the compilers can maliciously work against you. The tools the compilers are built on can work against you. The silicon can work against you. How do you have inspectability all the way down to the silicon? So we had an event earlier this week, which I encourage you to take a look at, Silicon Salon 4, that directly was talking about some of these types of things. So yes, there are some newer cryptography things in the area of deterministic nonces that can prevent certain kinds of problems. But there can still be key leakage, especially malicious key leakage in signatures in a variety of situations that you can't really do deterministic nonces with. So there is now a new anti-exfiltration technique. This one was proposed by Blockstream that basically, has the device prove that it incorporated the randomness from the requester. not just the randomness from the device, in such a fashion that you can know that as long as you can trust your own. I mean, it isn't going to solve the problem if the requester and the hardware are compromised, but only one of them have to be honest for this system, for this to work. I think there's a whole family of these types of emerging cryptographic approaches so that we can trust our hardware less over time. I mean, if you think about it, say with Frost multisig, I heard somebody in this group is doing threshold stuff. You don't have to trust the individual device to the same level in a Frost quorum. And a lot of people, when they think about Frost quorums and stuff, they're thinking, oh, I'm going to have other people approve things that I do. That violates self-sovereignty, or, how do I coordinate all this stuff? Well, in fact, there are multiple levels. We have one of our companies in the Gordian developer community has a ring device that might have one of your shards. Your phone might have another shard, an external service might have another shard, and there may be two more parts of your quorum that are offline or available with extra level of authentication, or potentially deliberate delay, like it will respond after 24 hours, that type of stuff. There's a lot of interesting new opportunities in that space. I'm done.
Nice. Ash?
I think I'd like to take it up a step, and I like what you said around what exactly are you trusting? I mean, it's a tale as old as time, right? Somebody creates a secure encryption, somebody's going to crack it. It's only going to be secure for that long. I think part of the question we have to answer is, what are we trying to trust? Are we trying to trust an identity? Are we trying to trust a signature? It really depends on the question that you're asking of what's the trust that you're trying to have in that situation that determines what different technologies can solve it. Because yes, it'll always be crackable at some stage, and we're at the level where hardware wallets and cold keys are kind of more secure than software ones to start with. So we still have a lot to solve in this space.
Okay, Shady?
Incredible. Yeah, I think I was next up in the queue. Yeah, I really like the direction this conversation is going in. I think, when we're really thinking about wallet governance, when we're thinking about key management, kind of just comes back to that theme that's been on our minds for a while with data custody. So, I mean, if you're developing consumer facing or even dev tools for developers that are building consumer facing applications, you're going to be worried about, you're going to be taking for granted a lot of the tooling and the libraries of the device that the user is going to be running, right? So most of us have Apple or Android phones, and we just expect that they're running the most up-to-date cryptographic libraries. Apple has made a huge kind of public statements and taken actions towards demonstrating their commitment to privacy, that you can trust Apple. But as the folks that have been behind, for example, the Freedom Box project, right? Like, you can't really always guarantee that a black box company that's for profit is always going to have the best interests of the consumer in mind, and really can demonstrate that values-driven approach towards consumer privacy and fundamental rights such as individual self-sovereignty. So, I think, there's tons of examples of this, right? Like, if you dig a little deep into the Apple's technology, you'll see that they're using a separate cryptographic trip, a secure enclave, to store a lot of this, to perform key management and supposedly keep users safe. But I think secure enclaves have tons of potential problems and vulnerabilities. A really great website I like to check every time from time to time is sgx.fail. It shows you all the ways that zero-day exploits can worm their way into firmware that are almost impossible to keep ahead of as a software developer. So you kind of just need to trust the software. So that aside, I think there's only so much we can do unless, an Ethereum phone or some sort of Freedom Box 3.0 is kind of popularized, or some big event happens with Apple, either regulations based or some big data breach that forces people in droves to migrate to perhaps different types of open source technology. That being said, I think that there are so I think ECDSA signatures were brought up in BIP 32 with hierarchical deterministic wallets, which I think was a major improvement. And since then, there have been multiple improvement proposals in Bitcoin, such as, for example, multi-signature schemes on chain, adding symmetric keys or symmetric passphrase to secure, for example, your seed phrase in case it's ever leaked or stolen. I think actually, there was a huge leak recently, and these are all great, and people are looking to incorporate this, but the user experience is going to be really important. And MetaMask is a great example of this, right? So you have all of this technology, all this tooling, and MetaMask is trying to translate this to onboard the next 100 million users into crypto, into self-sovereign key management, right? And I think one of the major issues with MetaMask, again, is that they're dealing with the Apple Store and its rules and regulations. And they've recently opted into iCloud recovery as a way of being able to recover your passphrase if you ever lose it. However, it wasn't long before, I think Ash, you mentioned the tale as old as time, before it was cracked. I think just a couple weeks ago, or maybe just under a month ago, this recovery mechanism was exploited. Funds were stolen. And so I think, there are problems on MetaMask's side, but there are other technologies right now that are possible. I think, first off, oblivious pseudo-random functions have really, really interesting properties, especially when combined with multi-party compute. I think, they also offer potential quantum resistance as well, if you're thinking about how do you protect the seed of a random function and keep that insulated from the parties that should know about it. And two-party ECDSA signature, I think, is also going to be really important in the near future. If MetaMask had implemented something like that, right, then perhaps the remote server and the local device could then, you can smooth over trust over those two parties. But yeah, no, it's all terribly interesting. And I'd love to hear kind of what you all have to think about the state of this too.
Thanks, Tommaso.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, very interesting discussion. I think so. One point that I think is being we have to pay attention to is really the problem of inspectability, as Chris said. So the problem of we are dealing with a stack here, and the trust has to be evaluated from the lowest level, like from the hardware one, up to the application level. So if we look at how most users, private users, organizations manage wallets, let's forget for a second about hardware wallets. But if, as you said, you run your wallet on a smartphone or whatever, I think one of the biggest problems that we have nowadays is that we don't have a trusted environment to run these applications. Because nowadays, I mean, most operating systems do not offer you the level of trust that you need to run these applications. And even if they do, which is possible, for example, you might think of compiling your own and forgetting about the compiler problem. But then there is the problem of hardware. I mean, where do you run this? Where do you run your applications? For example, if you run it on an Intel system, then you have the famous, closed source Intel subsystem that it's pretty much a black box that you cannot really inspect, and you cannot really disable. Hardware wallets solve this problem up to a certain point, but there is still the problem of the root of trust, hardware provenance, hardware design. So for sure, systems like threshold signatures that aim at distributing a little bit the trust requirements over a threshold of participants or a threshold of devices, this helps in this this tool help in this respect. Yeah, from what we have seen during our audits at Kudelski Security, it is very difficult to implement the systems correctly, because threshold signatures are extremely complex, and so a lot of care must be taken in doing things properly. Then, just wanted to point the attention on the importance of trusting the stack, starting from the hardware level, which is, I think, it's one of the most overlooked issues in cybersecurity in general nowadays.
Yeah, can I jump in there quickly? What's quite interesting is for the stack. What some people are recommending now, and I don't know if it's a good idea, is to use Chromebooks. So what you do is you have a Chromebook and then you
use it now.
Oh, should I use a Mac? I can yell. Is that better? If I yell, awesome.
Yeah.
So people are starting to recommend that obviously you have a hardware device for the signing, and you rely on a Chromebook because you can't install any software there, and you just bookmark the pages. So that's one way that you'd want a low budget, but it's probably not the most ideal setup either. Sorry, I just want to pull that in there.
Thanks. And Chris?
Yeah, very interesting discussion. So we've actually been building our Verida wallet over the past over 12 months now. And this is something that we sort of think about a lot. You know, I think the focus so far has been on, I guess, a crypto wallet and the securing of that. There's also just the general privacy implications of your activity. You know, there's a need for, well, actually, a recent example, I think there was talk of MetaMask sort of monitoring people's URLs, or at least there was RPC URLs that you know, were monitoring what people were doing on chain and then linking that back to IP addresses. So there's a privacy thing there in terms of your network connectivity. There was another wallet which had an issue where they had a bug. Well, assume it's a bug, given the benefit of the doubt, where private keys were being logged for debugging purposes, but that debug log was actually going back to a centralized server, and then somebody found the logs and found a whole bunch of keys. So, you know, there's a range of things to consider when you actually build a wallet. There's other metadata. You know, we will have access to, you know, people requesting, you know, metadata about tokens and assets and transaction histories and things like that. And we don't want to have exposure to that. We want to minimize our footprint as much as we can from a security and privacy perspective. But to provide a really solid user experience, we have no choice but to, you know, collect that data, make that data available for users, you know, in a wallet. We have some other challenges because we're storing people's data, not just a crypto wallet, but having a key that can store sensitive information, or that can facilitate a single sign-on to an application. So once you start to think about those scenarios, you have a whole bunch of new challenges to think about. You know, are you sharing a key? You know, like Christopher mentioned, you don't want keys in a web browser if you can help it. So are you sharing an access token that expires? So there's a whole bunch of, I think, new challenges that we're going to see with wallets as we start to think of a wallet more than just crypto, but think about it, data, credentials, you know, storing verifiable credentials, thinking about how we're sharing them and prove them. How we authenticate with Web 2 systems and store that data in a wallet that then unlocks, you know, things in sort of, you know, Web 3, you know, on chain. So this is a really, really important conversation. I think that I think there's a lack of education and awareness for people. There's a real challenge that, you know, we can talk about this stuff at a technical level, but there's a real challenge. How do we explain this to a non-technical person? How do we give a non-technical person trust that, you know, this full stack can be relied upon? And, you know, this is not a new problem, but it becomes even more important as we protect more you know, digital assets, personal information, you know, identities, in this sort of digital world, and make it more accessible through wallets.
Thanks. So Christopher?
Thank you. So yeah, I wanted to sort of respond to a couple of these different things. I mean, we have a bunch of problems we have to do. Some of our architectural. You know, the authors of the early MetaMask didn't actually like BIP32. So they made a choice to basically use one key to rule them all against pretty much the last 15 years before MetaMask came out. You know, principle that, you know, you shouldn't have long-term keys. They should be rotated regularly, et cetera. So they didn't learn from that lesson, and then it became magnified because then it became legacy that everybody had to support MetaMask because everybody was using MetaMask. And now with account abstraction and some of these other things, we may finally beginning to dig ourselves out of that hole in the Ethereum ecosystem. Bitcoin never really quite had that problem. The whole point of Bitcoin was you never use a key more than once in theory. Well, twice, once to create the public key and the second time to spend the UTXO. So we have to be moving in that direction. On the sort of inspectability side of things and other such, I mean, one of the silicon designers, Crossbar Cranium, that is presented at Silicon Salon, it's basically putting two chips on the two CPUs on the board. It's not even a board, it's on a single package, excuse me. One is an ARM chip, which obviously has some proprietary aspects of it, but they're also putting RISC-V, and all of the code will be available so you can emulate that on an FPGA. So you could actually compare the FPGA results, which are, not exactly the same, to the results of the silicon. And then they're also working with another researcher, Bunny Studios in Taiwan, to basically, when they're going to make the chip, they're going to actually make it upside down. And the reason why is that there's some approaches using infrared light and very high resolution cameras that you can get some inspectability of the silicon. So it's not perfect. There's a lot of discussion in the dozen or so videos that you'll see in the Silicon Salon about limitations of what we can do, but we can go so much further. The other side of things is this here is the Passport from Foundation Devices. It is a air gap wallet. It has a camera on it and a QR display. And then Blockchain Commons wrote an air gap technology called UR, which can be used over QR codes. If they're large, they can even animate, but can also be used over a lot of other transports. One of the other transports that we're increasingly using is something we call a Tor gap, which is to use torrent services as a separation of interests and concerns. So you can go to, say, Spotbit and get the Bitcoin price over Tor confidentially, in a way that Tor can't even know that you're getting a price. And you can then compare that, say, with another Spotbit server. So we need to figure out, we need to have an industry acceptance that we need to have separation of interest, separation of concerns. We need to have incentive design for all of these different levels and inspectability and transparency. Because, what is it? Kirchhoff's law and Shannon's law basically say you have to presume that the attacker knows everything about your system. So transparency is good, because lack of transparency means we find these, problems like the Estonian ID system where, what is it? They had in a supposedly, proven, tested, internationally approved by a European organization that had, 1 in 256 public keys was utterly flawed, and public keys was utterly flawed and revealed the private key. That's awful. And it wouldn't have happened if it was, if it had not been under an NDA, and it's still, by the way, under an NDA. So we've got to solve these problems. Next.
Thanks. Ash?
So I absolutely support and love the idea of innovation in terms of hardware and software wallets, etc. But I think if you look at what banks do, right, and they've got a whole framework and ISO standards of how to implement that security. But when you log into your bank account, you're asked for a username, a password, you often a one-time PIN. They keep a record of your device's locations, what types of transactions you're doing, where you're doing it, like Chris said, the IP. And then there's also a separation between the interface and the execution layer. And that's, as Tommaso said, that's the stack that you're dealing with when you're dealing with a bank. And so if someone clones my card and makes a transaction, banks use third parties to detect that usage of that card in a different location, it doesn't match my spending patterns, etc., etc. So yes, okay, there's a data issue there, but I'm really happy when they detect that somebody stole my card and made a transaction that is not me, and they block that. And so there's this massive stack that we're working with just to achieve that security, which is what most people are comfortable with. And yet we expect users to use a single key with perhaps a single password in order to secure multiple things, their funds, their identity, their ability to sign things in crypto. And so, yes, as Chris said, there's a trade-off between privacy and security in that case. But the average person on the street is going to feel safer with a bank security because they know there's multiple systems at work to keep their money safe versus just a single key. And I'm not trying to detract from self-sovereignty. I think it's very important, but I think we've got a lot of problems to solve. And I think the more things we use your key and wallet for, the more important is to think about those different things that you use it for and what security we expect people to self-manage. And in which cases, is there a multi-method verification approach, possibly multi-key approach, and perhaps decentralizing your security as well? That might be warranted, because I don't believe relying on a single device and key is a viable long-term solution.
All right, and well, that's a good segue to my second question. We've spent like 40 minutes already on the first question, so and I prepared 5 questions. I don't think I'm going to ever get to the end. But so quite briefly, some of us are actually kind of concerned about the possibility of wallet centralization. The wallet running on your phone, or even being able to side load some of the, well, maybe not a good idea, but there are certainly discussions about it in any wallet. Even then, as most of the information technologies are, these things are exhibiting increasing return to scale, decreasing cost, and has natural tendency for centralization or monopolization. What is your take on that? How can we prevent this?
Yeah. So I'm very much this is very much a concern of mine and goes a long time back. I think what we have to do is design heterogeneous devices and standards to work with them, not work with devices. So anytime you go, say if you go into the Sparrow app for Bitcoin and you see that it supports this laundry list, what we call the NASCAR list of 10 different wallets, that's a bad sign, because it's basically saying you have to individually use the APIs, use the, have the user go to the exact page and the exact button or whatever to use it with that particular thing. We had that problem with, in the early days of certificate authorities and TLS. We had that problem with OpenID, where it ultimately, for a while there, we had these increasingly laundry lists of all the different services. But there's a natural tendency then for centralization to be on top of that list and get, everything below the fold, all the other alternatives disappear. So now you don't see OpenID with your ability to use your own service. So we have to avoid that. In the Bitcoin community, an increasing number of wallets are, I think there's now 12 companies that are doing a single standard for QR-based air gaps. So, and the code for that is heterogeneous. Some is written in C, some of it's written in JavaScript, some of it's written in Python, etc. for doing these. And yet, they all can interoperate. And we need to go to the next level. We need to have more of these types of things be done in that fashion, so that it's more like today, you don't really worry that it's, you don't have to choose, oh, with this site, I have to use HTTPS. And with this site, I have to use SHTTP, which was another competitive standard 20 years ago. You just use it. And but the CAs may be different, the servers behind it may be different. They all just have to conform to it. I mean, there still are centralization problems even with that, which we can talk about in another thing, but we can do better. That's it.
Okay.
So I guess what I want to talk about is basically centralization of wallet providers. I think we've got a great example in the room. I see a MetaMask sticker just there. I am right. That is MetaMask, isn't it? Yeah. So one is brand awareness, and they're everywhere. But I think the reason. So I think MetaMask is so popular because of probably two reasons. Maybe we can crowdfund this or work out other ideas. I think one, every crypto project outside of Bitcoin supports nearly at least EVM equivalent chains support MetaMask. So if I go on Optimism, Arbitrum, even Starknet to some extent, I could probably use MetaMask. And so if I want to compete with MetaMask as a wallet provider, then I need to be able to be as widely supported as them. That's one reason why people just use MetaMask. And two, it's also just the brand around security. MetaMask still has a very strong brand in terms of being the most secure wallet. While they are the most secure wallet, it's a completely different question. It's more of a branding. Sorry, my watch is talking to me. See, snooping on me now. So maybe as a let's give an example here. Raise your hand if you've used MetaMask before. That's I guess half the room. Are you still using MetaMask? Raise your hand if you're still using it. Exact same people. There you go. We're all using MetaMask. So it's definitely got a good moat.
Thanks.
It's definitely an incentive problem.
One side there was something in the audience.
I wonder how many people uses more than one wallet.
Raise your hand if you use more than one wallet.
Sorry, all MetaMask or different?
Other than MetaMask. Okay, that some hands went down there actually because of that.
Does hardware with MetaMask count as another wallet?
I like to assume people are using hardware wallets, but maybe, yeah, that's another great point. Because there's also centralization around Ledger. To get I don't hear of a Ledger wallet. Okay. See, that's still half the room. So there you go, hardware wallet centralization and also the wallet provider online centralization. What? Oh, you use Trezor. I forgot about Trezor. Who uses Trezor then?
Yeah.
So for them, competition.
I think the worst problem though is the incentives. So if you look at Ledger and Trezor in the last 5 years, most of their money has not come from the sales of their hardware. They can probably sell their hardware at a cost. They make their money from having tokens pay to add their token type to their particular wallet. They have very little incentive to do necessarily the right thing. They may have good intentions and whatever, but the incentive design is such that it's not really in your interest. I mean, you have a ledger, say for Bitcoin, your hardware is not self-sovereign. It won't work without Ledger. You have to use their app to communicate with it. You have to use their back-end service to be able to get the blockchain information, et cetera. There is no separation of interests. And any software engineer probably knows the term separation of concerns. This is, one of the things we do when we're designing code, but we have to actually do this at another level. We need to have a separation of interests and probably 4 or 5 other patterns of separation to really isolate things so that different parties can, both compete and, co-opetition, as well as pure cooperation. And as users, somehow we've got to figure out how to get regular people to say, no, I'm not going to buy your product because it does not interoperate. And once I use your service, I'm stuck. I'm not going to use you. I want something where I get to choose. Innovation is going to be on things like UX and quality assurance and support and inspectability and things of that nature. So that's my hope.
Just on that too, I think this is really, really important because if you look at the history of new technology and innovation, you start off with this proliferation of lots of different options. There's this sort of early innovation phase. Everyone's sort of playing around with different things and innovating. You know, we saw that with the early days of web browsers. You know, they sort of one-upped each other with new features and capabilities. But you know, eventually there's a consolidation, and you know, that consolidation can, I guess, in this space, can be a consolidation into something that is very open and community orientated and has a really good architecture, I guess, is what you're talking to a little bit, Christopher, with the separation of the different components. Or it could become, you know, a few key wallet providers that are effectively centralized. You know, Apple are in an incredibly powerful position with their, you know, with the reach they have with mobile devices. They play a really important role. They will play a really important role in some of the technology that's even available, I guess, for mass consumers. So there are definitely a lot of risks here that we end up back in a decentralized world, but with centralized gatekeepers. You think about, you know, the web. You know, in many ways, we've got this decentralized, you know, infrastructure with HTTP and you know, TCP/IP, but we have these centralized kind of overlords that sit on top of that. So yeah, it's something we all have to, I think, work really hard towards if that's where we want to go.
Yeah, and actually, can I jump in there? It's also stickiness. Like, what is really nice about a lot of these wallet providers is that they all support the 12-word seed or 24-word seed. So it is possible to change, you know, hardware device or, of course, wallet provider as well. So, you know, but
it's interesting. People are Trezor now basically changed their code, so you have to use the hardwired paths of BIP32. MetaMask. I mean, I don't know. Even that has you know interesting problems because it wasn't well architected for these separations in the long term. Also, you know, there are a number of people who want to use these types of things for, say, 25519, which is, you know, the most prevalent verification signing and is a, you know, an international standard. And BIP 32 under BIP 39 doesn't quite work with in the same way. There are definitely security concerns when you try to apply those to 25519 keys. So there's a lot of, you know, gotchas. I mean, we ran into it. You know, we've had to kind of lock people into the English version of those words. Whereas, you know, like the slip 39 from 39, once you do slip 39, you're kind of locked into the Trezor device infrastructure because there is no interoperability round tripping to English BIP 39. So it's a complicated issue to do right. And we just, you know, we need not to just we're at the point of maturity where just throwing it out on the table and saying, oh, it's open source is not good enough. We need open development. I also wanted to point people to the DID rubric. This is a W3C note that went along with the DID, and it talks about what does decentralization mean. And it turns out there are lots and lots and lots of ways to think about decentralization. So, you know, a lot of people would argue Bitcoin is very decentralized with, you know, in under a variety of different practices. But, you know, it also has a very small number of developers. And because of legal challenges, a lot of those developers have left because they're being, you know, sued by the fake Satoshi. So, you know, we have to address all of these different types of ways of thinking about decentralization, not just one. There is no, does anybody know what Arrow's law is? Arrow's law is a principle under voting that there is no perfect voting system. You can actually mathematically prove that if you have all these criteria about voting systems, that there is no solution because the requirements interfere with each other. So I think we're going to find that, you know, there's a Christopher's law of some kind that says there is no perfect decentralization. You by pushing forward in one particular direction, you may be losing in decentralization in another, and it's just going to require some juggling to find the right mix. That's it.
But it is kind of a trade-off, right? It's
yep.
If we want to commercialize this as quickly as possible, to commercialize it, to get it in everybody's hands, we're going to have to cut massive corners to do that quickly. Whereas if you are looking for a community that's like the CryptoPunks, you're going to have people that are willing to put more effort into their security, into their key management, etc., etc. But the average person on the street isn't. They want low effort. They are outsourcing most of their life to other people and other things and other companies.
Right, but we can let them do that. But we should, I'd rather see EU and EIDAS and things of that nature concentrate on saying, okay, yes, you bank who have a trusted relationship with these parties can do these different types of things where a party delegates that to you. But it really has to truly be interoperable. There is the GDPR portability requirement, which is very poorly implemented and used right now. And governments don't have to follow it. It's only commercial operations that have to support the GDPR portability. But we need that. We need that if you delegate, using, that's where I brought up in the previous session, the law of agency, a party to represent you, whether or not it's your parents or a bank or some other trusted institution, EFF, I don't care, or multiple ones, we have 3 or 4 and each has a different ability to help you. There ought to be laws of custom around, them representing you in the same way that when you go to a financial advisor or to a doctor, they have a responsibility to you as the individual that is, not contractual. It is, a duty as your agent. So, that's what we need governments to be working on.
Thanks a lot. Is there any question from the floor quickly? Looks like not.
Yeah, maybe I could have one comment to that. I think it's more just it's sort of related in the sense, like if you consider like the traditional Web2 banking world, custody was mandatory. If I want to interact with the financial system, I have to hand over my money, and that's they take custody, then they send the funds. I think what sometimes I guess we underappreciate in crypto is that custody is optional. People may want to use Coinbase custody, and as a wallet provider, for example, and that they should have the right to do that alongside a bunch of the LN providers, Lightning Network providers. A lot of them are custodial, and that's still fine. But it's always important to have the right not to use a custodial solution, but still interact with the system, and that's really awesome. That's the thing that makes crypto special.
All right, so
I have one.
Yes, please.
I have one question. Okay, so in the first half of this discussion, so I think someone said about the literacy for the non-tech people for the wallet, and that education is much important because it's one of the reasons why that El Salvador the trial failed is a lack of education for the technology and finance for both. And at the same time, I feel that the wallet is a very simple word, and it's a very easy to understand for general people. But when we hear that word wallet, that the definition is very different among different types of the background, because general people think that wallet is wallet, but from the regulator point of view, the wallet has a very different types of requirement or definition. So so that definition or understanding for the word of wallet is very different.
Yeah. I mean, maybe just to give context, I think it was Financial Cryptography 16. There was a paper that tried to redefine the term wallet as a coin management tool. This is, of course, a very wordy word that it's I have a word for, but I mean, it's a more accurate word, but no one's ever going to use that in practice. Yeah. And so people there is keyring.
Yeah, the other problem with wallets today is that wallet often refers to a variety of things, but in most cases, wallets in the computer sense are rented. Okay, I may think I own my iPhone, but it is completely rented from Apple. I pay an initial subscription by getting that gives me a device, and as long as I continue to to pay and do updates with them and whatever, they'll continue to support me for a time. But at any time, they could basically say, turn off all of Russia because Russia doesn't like Apple. And at some point, Apple may say, well, we're tired of that. We're going to turn off everybody in Russia. So, we need to begin to move toward where wallets are truly self-sovereign. And it's really hard because even the chips, in a sense, are rented because you can only get updates or bug fixes and things of that nature in chips. Only the chip manufacturer can do that. So that's actually one of the other topics at a Silicon Salon is how do we have self-sovereign chips where we can truly trustfully, if we wish to, take over and truly own the devices that are representing us. And we need to be moving in that direction because users look at that wallet and they own it, they control it, it's in their pocket, they get to choose who pulls it out. That's not the way our electronic wallets work.
And so, wallet nowadays, wallet has a multiple function. As Patrick said, that this is a tool for the coin management originally, but at this moment, that wallet is used for the authentication and authorization, and some privacy protection mechanism inside that wallet. And part of it thinking that wallet is a tool for the tracing something, and of course that wallet is a source of profit for the company. That there is multiple different types of functionality and requirement inside the wallet. It's a source of the many complications of the understanding the wallet at this moment.
In the identity world, these days, wallets are out of a piece of software that stores verifiable credentials and mobile driver's license and things like that, which is very different from the keyring. Right? Yeah. So, we need more precision in the discussion.
Yeah. And there's some questions in the audience.
Yeah, please.
Well. I think she was first. Do you want to go first?
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, it's probably better going up here. Sorry, guys.
It's just a very short comment. But as we are working with regulators in Europe, we see that terminology is so problematic. And now you're talking about wallet. I know that just because this thing is called wallet, there was different ideas on how to regulate it in Europe. And we had this recent problem with the Data Act, which regulates smart contracts. And the regulators, they really think that it's somehow connected to a smart contract because it was in the regulation, they said it should be in way compliant as other contracts are written with other means. So I'm not sure if you have any suggestion on how to improve that and how to find the right terms, or at least change them, or this when we're talking to regulators. But we're seeing that it is increasingly important. Even the terms that we are associating with, I don't know, EVM or something similar. It's all kind of negative.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I can talk to that because we're right at the crux of that. Our mobile phone app is a crypto wallet, but it's also a decentralized, identifier, self-sovereign identity wallet that supports verifiable credentials. And so we had a battle. We actually called our app a vault, thinking that a vault was a way to kind of, get the terminology or the understanding that it's sort of like a secure place, but not necessarily just for, financial kind of transactions. But we have sort of since realized that wallet is just such a commonly accepted term that we can't kind of like change that common sort of language. But there is going to be, I believe, a convergence of functionality in what we kind of call this sort of mobile app that is going to bring together all of these different pieces of authentication and crypto assets and, storing of credentials and accessing of data. And we definitely need to kind of, as a industry as a whole, get some really clear kind of language that we can all kind of start to point to.
Yeah. And I think there's a real risk that, if we don't sort of detach wallets, from this sort of centralization regime, then we're going to end up with that, that your wallets are going to basically be an Android wallet and an iPhone wallet. And yeah, there might be some other little niche things, everything there, but everybody will demand it works with that, and they have such control and such ability to drive standards, drive agendas in nation states that it'll just be huge problems. And right now they're winning. Okay, so even with very aspirational things, the EU just put out a really wonderful statement about digital rights and such. But with the week before, they just put out another statement about, oh well, we have to control every dollar that is sent to make sure that $5 doesn't get sent accidentally to a terrorist. We've got some real problems in this area. And I'm not sure
absolutely.
we're winning.
And it goes for just the tokens themselves that we're managing on the chain, right? Like almost every country out there is struggling with is it a security, or is it a commodity, or is it cash, or is it whatnot? And we're kind of saying to the general population out there, it's like, oh, it's all of these things, or it can be any of these things, and we're not really clearly delineating it, because if they have to deal with more than one thing, it makes it complicated for people. And so in the same way, I think it has converged into this term wallet, because it means when somebody new onboards, they can just deal with this one thing. And it's kind of like a overbearing solving of this UX problem to make it the one thing that creates all these other issues downstream. And at some point we're going to have to bite the bullet and separate these things out and solve these problems individually. Or, Chris, if you could solve them all in your vault, that'd be awesome.
All right. Was there any other person who was raising a hand on the floor? No?
There was one, but he's gone now.
All right.
Exited the building.
Okay. All right. So we are actually 7 minutes past the scheduled time. So I guess we should close the panel.
Thank you for the two questions. It was very good.
Yeah. So I'd like to thank all the panelists for extremely productive discussion, and I want everybody to give a round of applause.
Thank you very much. All session of today ended, and we have reception from now.